war began without warning. Across the stars, a peaceful alien species found themselves under attack from an empire that knew only conquest. Their defenses crumbled in days. Their fleets shattered before they could even rise to fight. Cities burned. Skies turned red with fire, and screams filled the night as people fled into the shadows of ruined streets. Families who had lived in peace for generations now ran with nothing but fear in their eyes. No one understood why the enemy had come. The invaders never spoke, never gave reason, only destroyed. Every day the surviving aliens sent desperate messages, begging for aid from anyone who might listen. Their signals crossed the galaxy. They pleaded with the Council of Great Powers, those mighty species who sat in their crystal towers and ruled over trade, diplomacy, and fleets larger than the imagination of lesser races. But the Council was silent. Some pretended not to hear. Others whispered in private chambers that helping this weak species was not worth the risk. No one wanted to face the empire that brought fire and ruin. The distress calls continued, and each time the answer was the same: silence. The weak were left to die. The survivors tried to fight on their own. They raised what little ships they had left, but those ships were old, thin, and weak. The empire swatted them away like flies. Entire colonies vanished in clouds of ash. Refugees crowded the last few worlds still standing, praying for miracles. Children asked their parents why no one was helping them, and the parents had no answers. Some began to believe that the galaxy itself had abandoned them, that no one would come, that they were doomed to vanish and be forgotten. But then, something strange happened. One night, in the middle of endless screams, one of the deep-range receivers on the last surviving capital world picked up a new voice. It was not the Empire. It was not the Council. The voice was calm, direct, and carried in a language most had never heard before. At first, the alien engineers were confused. They ran translations, checked records, compared old data. Then their faces went pale. The translation came back simple and terrifying. "This is humanity. We hear your call. We are coming." The words spread through the refugee shelters like a spark of fire in a dry forest. Humanity. Many had heard the name before, but only as rumor. Humans were new to the stars, barely a century into faster-than-light travel. The Council had dismissed them as ambitious but weak, a species with loud voices and little strength. They had no great fleets, no advanced technology compared to the old powers. To many, the idea that humans could stand against the Empire was laughable. And yet here they were, answering a call that no one else dared to answer. Hope flickered among the desperate aliens. If humans were brave enough to come, maybe they were not as weak as the Council claimed. Maybe they carried weapons no one had seen, or maybe they would simply fight harder than anyone else. Because unlike the Council races, they did not fear sacrifice. But with hope came doubt. What if the humans failed? What if their small fleet was destroyed before even reaching the homeworld? Then not only would the aliens be doomed, but humanity too would fall into the fire. Some leaders even whispered that the humans should stay away, that no more lives should be lost in their name. The people, however, did not agree. Refugees looked up at the night sky with silent prayers. Children whispered to one another about the strange humans who promised to help when no one else would. Entire families stayed awake at night, staring at the stars, hoping to see the first signs of ships breaking through the void. Even the soldiers, battered and broken, felt something they had not felt in years. Faith that maybe, just maybe, the war was not yet lost. But the Empire was not slowing down. Their fleets gathered in orbit around the next world on their list. Their soldiers prepared to march through the cities, to burn the homes, to erase every last trace of life. Time was running out. The distress call had gone unanswered for so long that many believed humanity would arrive too late if they arrived at all. The silence of the Council echoed louder than the roar of enemy guns. In the shadows of a ruined city, one alien elder spoke to his people. He told them to hold on just a little longer. He told them that somewhere out there, a species that no one trusted, no one respected, had answered the call. He told them that in the darkest of nights, light often came from the most unexpected star. His people listened, their tired eyes turning upward. They wanted to believe, even if belief seemed foolish, and so the waiting began. Every hour, scanners swept the skies. Every day, more refugees crowded into the bunkers. Every night, the enemy fleet came closer. The world held its breath. Somewhere out there, humans were moving. Whether they were strong enough, whether they would survive the journey, no one could know. But they had spoken, and their words carried weight heavier than any weapon. The message echoed across the desperate world. repeated again and again, until even the children could say it in their sleep. It was not a promise of victory, nor a declaration of power. It was something far simpler, something the galaxy had forgotten. It was the sound of a hand reaching out into the fire. This is humanity. We are coming. The alien survivors did not know whether to feel hope or fear, but they knew one thing. For the first time in years, they were not alone. And in the distance of the endless void, something was stirring. Something that would either save them or destroy them completely. The Empire's shadow spread like a storm across the stars. Planet after planet fell under their fire. Skies glowed with burning cities. Oceans boiled from orbital strikes, and countless voices were silenced before they could even call for mercy. Refugee ships fled in every direction, carrying the last fragments of families and hope. Yet no matter how far they traveled, the Empire always followed. It seemed nothing could stop their hunger. The survivors huddled together on the last remaining homeworlds, watching the skies with terror. They whispered about the humans, the mysterious newcomers who had promised to come. But as the days stretched into weeks, no one had seen a single human ship. The council powers gathered in secret chambers far away from the flames. They spoke with calm voices while others burned. To them, the war was not tragedy but calculation. Some argued that helping the dying species would only waste resources. Others feared the Empire's wrath and said it was wiser to stay silent than risk destruction. Humanity's promise to intervene was mocked. Council leaders described them as reckless, foolish, and naive. In polished halls, their words carried laughter, but in the refugee camps of the desperate, their laughter was poison. For those who waited in fear, every insult against humanity was another knife in the heart. Still, in the darkness, a spark remained. The alien survivors clung to the single message that had broken through the silence. Even if the humans were small, even if they had little power, at least they had answered. No other species had dared. Every night the signal was replayed across the shelters, and the words rang louder than the thunder of the Empire's guns. Some began to believe that even if humanity failed, their attempt to fight would light a fire strong enough to inspire others. Yet time was cruel. Each passing day brought new ships of the Empire closer to their skies. In the bunkers beneath the capital city, children drew pictures of humans. They imagined tall warriors with shining armor and fire in their eyes. They imagined fleets of ships larger than mountains, cannons bright as suns, heroes who would stand in front of them like walls of steel. But the adults knew better. They had heard whispers of humans from travelers and traders. Humans were clever but untested. Their fleets were not the largest, their weapons not the most advanced. And yet something about them was different. They were not afraid to bleed. They were not afraid to stand where others ran. It was this spirit that the survivors clung to. The Empire's fleet finally arrived in orbit of the last great world. Their warships hung in the sky like blades ready to strike. The alien defenders scrambled to raise their few surviving ships, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. The Empire's dreadnoughts cast shadows so wide they darkened whole continents. Inside the bunkers, silence fell as the first alarms blared. The end had come. And still there was no sign of humanity. But in the void beyond the system, something stirred. Hidden far from the eyes of the Council, humanity's fleet moved in silence. Their warships were unlike the polished vessels of the old powers. They were scarred, armored, built not for display but for survival. Their crews were restless, their captains grim. They had heard the cries of strangers and chosen to answer even if it meant death. To them, it was not a matter of politics or gain. It was a matter of principle. Humanity knew the pain of silence, the weight of abandonment. They would not leave others to suffer the same fate. On the alien homeworld, scanners picked up faint readings. At first, the operators thought they were errors, static from damaged equipment. But then the signals grew stronger. Shapes began to form on the edge of the system. Dozens at first, then hundreds. Engines flared in the darkness. The alien survivors held their breath as the readings became clear. Unknown ships, massive and fast, were emerging from faster-than-light travel. Panic rippled through the Empire's ranks. They had not expected resistance. To them, this world was already dead. Now a new fleet had arrived, one they had never faced before. The Empire commanders barked orders, rallying their ships, but uncertainty bled into their voices. Who were these intruders, and why had they come here of all places? In the shelters below, refugees crowded around screens. Children pressed their faces against cold glass, their eyes wide with wonder. The elders whispered prayers, the soldiers clenched their fists, and the hopeless felt the first sparks of courage. They did not yet know what the humans carried with them. They did not know if this new fleet could win, but for the first time the sky was no longer empty. Above the burning world, the first human warship broke through the clouds of stars. Its hull was blackened with scars of past battles. Its weapons gleamed with silent menace. More followed, emerging like wolves from the darkness. Engines thundered and the void trembled under their march. Humanity had arrived. The enemy fleets adjusted their formations, ready to crush the newcomers as they had crushed so many before. The alien survivors watched in silence, caught between hope and terror. They had prayed for aid, but aid alone was not enough. They needed victory, and victory seemed impossible against such a monstrous foe. Yet the humans did not hesitate. Their ships spread out, their weapons primed, their captains steady. Humanity had come not to plead or to bargain, but to fight. For the first time, the Empire felt uncertainty. They had faced the council races before. They had faced countless species who begged for mercy, but this was different. Humanity had not come to bow. Humanity had come to break the silence with fire, and as the first shots prepared to fly, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The alien homeworld trembled as the skies filled with fire. From the blackness of space, the human fleet emerged like predators released from a long cage. Their warships were not the shining jewels of the council fleets nor the massive floating palaces of ancient powers. They were forged from steel and necessity, built not to impress but to endure. Their armor was scarred, their hulls painted with the silent memory of countless struggles. Each ship carried the weight of those who had fought and died before, and now they came together with a single purpose: to protect a world that was not their own. The refugees on the ground watched in awe as streaks of light cut across the heavens. They pressed against bunker walls and gathered around view screens, seeing something they had never seen before. Human ships dropped from faster-than-light travel with perfect precision, every formation disciplined, every movement sharp. No chaos, no hesitation. They moved like a single organism, one heartbeat, one purpose. For a people who had only known abandonment, this display was almost beyond belief. Children whispered to their parents, asking if these strange humans were truly real. The elders could not answer. They simply watched as the sky, once ruled by the enemy, now carried a new shadow. The Empire's commanders laughed at first. Their fleets were massive, their dreadnoughts so large they blotted out the stars. To them, these human vessels were nothing more than insects buzzing around the fire. They gave the order to engage, confident that their strength would crush the intruders in moments. The first waves of enemy ships surged forward, engines roaring like storms, weapons already primed to strike. Yet the humans did not scatter. They did not retreat. They stood their ground, and the silence shattered. Human cannons fired with blinding force, cutting through the darkness like lightning. Precision strikes tore through enemy ships with cold efficiency. Where the Empire relied on overwhelming numbers, humanity relied on control and discipline. Each shot found its mark, each maneuver carried purpose. Alien survivors watching from below gasped as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. The Empire, feared across the galaxy, was bleeding. Ships that had reduced entire civilizations to ash now burst into fire one after another, under the steady fire of a fleet no one had believed in. The enemy responded with fury. Their dreadnoughts unleashed waves of energy that shook the void. Dozens of human ships staggered under the onslaught. Explosions bloomed in the darkness, and for a moment it seemed as though the humans might break. Refugees cried out in despair, clutching one another in the bunkers. But through the fire, the human fleet held the line. They absorbed the punishment, adjusted their formations, and struck back harder. Every loss only fueled their resolve. Every ship destroyed was answered by the fall of 2 more enemy vessels. Humanity fought with a kind of desperation that terrified the Empire. For they did not fight like a power-protecting pride. They fought like a people who understood the cost of silence, who would never again allow others to face it alone. One ship among the fleet carried the human admiral. His eyes were calm as he stood on the command deck, surrounded by officers who carried no fear in their voices. Reports of losses poured in, warnings of overwhelming enemy numbers filled the air, but he gave only a single order: hold the line. His words were carried across the fleet, and every captain obeyed without question. The humans did not fight for glory or recognition. They fought for the strangers who had cried for help in the dark. That alone was enough. The Empire unleashed its greater weapons. From the heart of their fleet, a dreadnought emerged unlike any other. Its size dwarfed even the largest human ships, its weapons glowing with energy that could tear through continents. Refugees on the ground saw it looming above their skies and fell into silence. Even the bravest among them felt their hope flicker. The humans had fought well, but how could anyone stand against such a beast? Yet the human fleet did not falter. The admiral's command rang out once more, and the ships moved with deadly unity. Smaller vessels darted like wolves, distracting the dreadnought's massive guns while the larger human ships closed in. Torpedoes struck, beams of energy carved into its shields, and explosions rattled its vast frame. The battle became chaos, a storm of fire and steel. The Empire expected the humans to retreat under such pressure, but humanity pressed forward. Each strike heavier, each maneuver more daring. The alien survivors could hardly believe what they were seeing. For generations they had been told that humans were weak, a minor race, a voice in the background of the galaxy's great chorus. But here, in the very moment of their extinction, humanity had stood where no one else dared. Their ships burned, their crews bled, but they did not yield. The Empire dreadnought unleashed another devastating blast, ripping through the shields of a human cruiser. The ship exploded in brilliant fire, and the refugees cried out in grief. But before the wreckage even faded, 2 more human ships charged forward, ramming volleys into the dreadnought's exposed flank. Their weapons tore through armor that had never before been breached. The dreadnought staggered, its engines sputtering, its massive frame groaning under the weight of the assault. On the ground, silence fell once more. The alien refugees watched with wide eyes as the impossible continued. Against all odds, the humans had brought the enemy to its knees. Hope, fragile and trembling, returned to their hearts. Children cheered, elders wept, and soldiers clenched their fists with pride they had not felt in years. But the battle was not over. Even wounded, the dreadnought was still powerful. Its engines roared, its weapons prepared to fire again, and the void shook with the sound of its rage. Humanity had struck, but whether they could finish the fight remained uncertain. And as the lights of fire burned across the sky, one truth became clear. The galaxy had been wrong about humanity. They were not weak. They were not naive. They were something else entirely, something the Empire had never faced before, something the Council would never again ignore. The final clash had only begun. The void trembled as the Empire's dreadnought rose from the fire like a wounded beast refusing to fall. Its engines groaned, its massive body cracked with scars from human fire, but its weapons still glowed with deadly energy. The refugees on the ground felt their brief hope flicker again. They had seen the humans fight with courage. They had seen enemy ships burn, but the monster above them was not yet finished. It turned its colossal guns toward the human fleet, and the stars seemed to darken as if the universe itself prepared for destruction. The first blast erupted with terrifying force. A wave of light ripped through space, striking a human destroyer head-on. The ship burst apart in a flash, scattering debris like sparks from a dying flame. Alarms echoed across the surviving ships as the dreadnought prepared its next strike. The alien survivors cried out in despair. For a moment it seemed the humans had done all they could. Against a power so vast, no courage, no determination, no sacrifice would ever be enough. But the humans did not retreat. They tightened their formation, shields overlapping, weapons still aimed forward. Their admiral stood tall on the command deck, face lit by the glow of burning stars. His voice carried across the fleet, steady and cold. He did not speak of victory or glory. He simply said what every human already knew: hold the line. His words were not a command but a promise, and the fleet obeyed without hesitation. The dreadnought's guns fired again. Another human cruiser exploded, fire spreading through the void. Still the fleet pressed forward. Smaller ships darted close to the beast, unleashing torrents of missiles and beams, each strike breaking more of its shields. Others sacrificed themselves to protect the larger vessels, throwing their bodies of steel into the path of enemy fire. Humanity fought not as individuals but as one relentless force, every life willingly given to keep the line unbroken. From the surface below, the alien refugees wept as they watched. They had never seen such defiance, never imagined that any species would bleed so freely for strangers. For generations they had believed power was measured by numbers and weapons. But the humans fought with something else. Something invisible yet stronger than steel. They fought with unity, with will, with the promise that no one calling for help would ever be left unheard again. The Empire commanders grew restless. This was not how battles were meant to go. The dreadnought had crushed entire civilizations with ease, yet here it bled under the fangs of a smaller, weaker fleet. Their voices cracked with disbelief as reports came in. Shields failing, weapons disabled, engines struggling. They demanded retreat, but their leader snarled in rage and refused. To retreat from humanity, a race dismissed as children, would be humiliation. The dreadnought would fight until either it or the humans were ash in the void. The human admiral understood this. He knew the enemy would not break unless forced, and so he gave the order no one expected. The fleet shifted, drawing closer, even as enemy fire tore through their ranks. The humans prepared not for survival but for sacrifice. The admiral's eyes never wavered as he whispered the final command. Strike together, strike as one. Dozens of human ships ignited their engines at full burn, surging toward the dreadnought. They unleashed volleys of torpedoes and beams, hammering its shields until cracks burst across its surface. The dreadnought roared, retaliating with waves of fire that shredded ship after ship. Yet the humans did not slow. They pushed closer, into the very jaws of death, their weapons lighting the void like a storm. One destroyer, crippled and burning, turned its last strength into a spear. It rammed into the dreadnought's flank, detonating its reactor in a blinding explosion. The shockwave ripped through the monster's shields, tearing a hole wide enough for the fleet to strike deeper. The dreadnought staggered, its weapons flickering, but it did not fall. Another human ship followed, and then another, each one tearing pieces from its armor at the cost of their lives. Humanity was breaking themselves against the beast, but with every sacrifice the monster grew weaker. The alien survivors below were speechless. They had thought the humans mad, thought them doomed, but as ship after ship gave itself for the fight, a terrible realization spread. This was humanity's strength. Not their weapons, not their numbers, but their refusal to yield. They would give everything, even their existence, to keep a promise. The Empire had never faced such an enemy before. The dreadnought tried one final strike, its main cannon charging for a blast that could erase half the human fleet. But before it could fire, the admiral's flagship led the charge. The ship surged forward, guns blazing, its crew silent as they poured every last shot into the enemy's heart. Other ships followed, surrounding the dreadnought in a circle of fire. Together they unleashed one final storm, a storm so fierce the void itself seemed to cry out. The dreadnought's armor split. Flames burst from its core. The great monster that had haunted the galaxy screamed in silence as its body tore apart. The explosion lit the skies, brighter than suns, shaking the ground below. Refugees fell to their knees, unable to breathe, unable to speak as they watched the impossible. The Empire's greatest weapon was gone, but the price was terrible. Half the human fleet lay in ruins. Countless lives had been lost in the fire. The survivors aboard the remaining ships stood in silence, their victory heavy with sorrow. The admiral's voice came once more, soft but steady. He told his people that they had kept their word. They had answered the call, and though they mourned their dead, they knew those lives had carved a place for humanity in the stars. On the ground, the alien survivors no longer whispered in despair. They shouted in joy, in grief, in awe. For the first time, they saw that the galaxy was not as cold as they had believed. For the first time, they understood the true meaning of hope, and in their hearts they knew the galaxy itself had changed forever. Yet even as cheers filled the bunkers, shadows lingered in the void. The Empire was vast. This battle was only one world, one step. Humanity had won, but the war was not over. And now every power, friend and foe alike, would turn their eyes toward the species that had dared to defy the silence. The gathering darkness was broken, but the dawn was uncertain. The ruins of battle still glowed in the void as silence fell across the stars. Wreckage drifted slowly, broken ships turning like shadows against the dying light of burning engines. The Empire's dreadnought, once feared as unstoppable, now lay shattered in pieces, its fragments scattering like the bones of a fallen beast. The human fleet, scarred and bloodied, hovered in the aftermath of fire. Half their number was gone, but the survivors stood unbroken, their weapons still hot, their engines steady, their banners unbowed. On the surface below, the alien survivors emerged from their bunkers, trembling as they looked up at the sky. For so long they had seen only enemy fire, only the destruction of their cities and the silence of the galaxy. But now the sky belonged to something else. Humanity had carved its name into the heavens, not with words, not with promises, but with sacrifice and steel. Refugees lifted their voices in cries of joy. Parents held their children tight, and elders bowed their heads in reverence. They knew they had witnessed something that would never be forgotten. The council powers, watching from afar, could no longer laugh. Their screens showed the impossible. A young race, untested and underestimated, standing where none of them had dared. They had dismissed humans as reckless children, but now those same children had destroyed the Empire's strongest weapon and saved a species that the Council had abandoned. Shock turned to fear, and fear turned to quiet calculation. If humanity could do this for strangers, what could they do when their own survival was at stake? What could they unleash if the Council itself ever stood against them? The Empire was shaken. Across its vast territories, whispers of defeat spread like wildfire. Their fleets, once confident, now carried doubt. Their commanders looked over their shoulders, fearing the sudden shadow of human ships. They had faced countless enemies before, but none like this. None who fought not for conquest or power, but for the principle that no one calling for help should be left to die. The Empire understood something terrifying that night. They had not simply fought a fleet. They had awakened a force that could not be chained. Among the human ships, grief was heavy. Every survivor carried the weight of those who had not returned. Entire crews had been lost in flames, names that would never again be spoken except in memory. But there was no despair, only solemn pride. They had fought not for themselves but for others, and in that sacrifice they had shown the galaxy a truth it had forgotten. On the flagship, the Admiral stood in silence, watching the stars. His voice finally echoed across the fleet, steady and unbroken. He told them the battle was won, but the war was far from over. Humanity would not stop now. The galaxy had called for aid, and humanity had answered. And from this day onward, every corner of the stars would remember their answer. The alien survivors gathered at the ruins of their capital city. They stood together in broken streets, watching as human dropships landed. Out of them came soldiers in battered armor, their faces streaked with fatigue but their eyes filled with unshakable resolve. The aliens rushed forward, not with fear but with gratitude, their voices crying thanks in a dozen languages. Children clung to human soldiers, their small hands holding tightly to the strangers who had come from the dark to save them. For the first time in years, the survivors felt safe. For the first time, they felt seen. Yet deep in their hearts, they also felt something else: fear. For if humanity could do this, if they could fight with such ferocity for those who were not their own, what would they be capable of when their full strength was revealed? The Council feared this question. The Empire feared it even more, and even the saved species whispered among themselves, wondering if the humans were saviors or something far more dangerous. The galaxy had changed. Old powers could no longer pretend to rule unchallenged. The Empire could no longer believe itself invincible. The Council could no longer dismiss humanity as weak. From this moment on, every decision, every alliance, every war would carry the shadow of human presence. Humanity had stepped onto the stage of history not as guests, but as a force that demanded recognition.